This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese says party's housing policy won't drive up house prices. Mr Albanese is campaigning in Queensland after launching the party's campaign in Perth yesterday. The opposition is continuing its focus on cost of living and growing wages. Mr Albanese announced Labor's housing policy to provide housing support for up to 10,000 people. Mr Albanese says the policy is proven.
Our housing policy is good policy. How do we know that? Because we know that it works. In Western Australia, they've had a very similar plan now for 30 years. What it's done is enable people to get into housing who wouldn't otherwise get there, and it's also produced a return to the government.
An Afghan mother has asked the Prime Minister for help to fast-track visas for family under threat from the Taliban. The federal government has set aside 26,500 places in the humanitarian program for Afghan arrivals over the next 4 years and 5,000 places for family members. Hijara Tawfiq told Mr Morrison her extended family have been facing threats.
My son, 9 years working in America in full.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maria will be able to work with you. We are bringing thousands and thousands of people from Afghanistan. 16,500 we'll be bringing, and we will do everything we can.
Qantas has announced a major aircraft order that it says will shape its future. It will order 12 Airbus A350 aircraft capable of flying direct from Australia to any other city, including New York and London, starting from Sydney in late 2025. And under another project, the airline will order 40 new narrow-body jets starting late next year for domestic use. Qantas says all the planes will have lower emissions and less noise. Dozens of people have been evacuated from Azovstal steelworks in the southern port city of Mariupol in a convoy arranged by the United Nations and the Red Cross. Natalia Uzmanova is an employee of the steel plant and spent weeks in hiding in the complex. She says she felt like her heart was stopping during the Russian bombardment and did not see daylight for some time.
The shelling was so strong as it kept hitting near us. At the exit of the bomb shelter, on the top few steps, one could breathe as there was not enough oxygen. I was afraid to even walk out and breathe some fresh air. I was afraid to stick my nose out.
The steelworks is the only place in the city not controlled by Russian forces. The search for a Queensland fisherman continues 2 days after he fell from a boat off the coast of Townsville. 41-year-old Colin Palmer and his 45-year-old friend fell overboard when their boat was hit by a wave on Friday night. His friend was rescued by a commercial fishing boat early Saturday morning and is in a stable condition. Search efforts yesterday found no sign of Mr Palmer or the boat. In football, former Socceroos coach Ange Postecoglou has been named Manager of the Year in Scotland. In his first season working in the country, the Australian is closing on the Scottish Premiership title with Celtic. Celtic have a 6-point lead on Glasgow arch-rivals Rangers with 3 games to play. They are undefeated in their last 29 games in the Scottish Premiership. And that's SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Prime Minister Scott Morrison is rejecting suggestions an interest rate increase could hurt him on voting day. The Reserve Bank is expected to announce an interest rate increase for the first time in 11 years. Mr Morrison says voters understand pressures and will back the party they believe is a better economic manager. Mr Morrison does not think an increase in interest rates will affect his party.
Well, I think I've set out the position pretty clearly about what the macroeconomic environment is that is impacting on rates in Australia. I also didn't claim credit for interest rates going from 1.5% to 0.1%.
Labor says the Prime Minister is only taking credit for good economic news and not taking responsibility for the bad. The opposition's Treasury spokesperson, Jim Chalmers, says Scott Morrison wants to pretend that he has nothing to do with rising costs of living. He told the Seven Network he doesn't think anyone would be surprised by rising interest rates.
You know, under Scott Morrison, this is a full-blown cost of living crisis, and rising interest rates are about to be part of the pain. We've got skyrocketing costs of living, we've got falling real wages, and now at some point, today or next month, we're going to have interest rate rises as well. And so whether interest rates are increased today or not, the Prime Minister's economic credibility is in tatters.
A Sydney man has been sentenced to a maximum of 12 years and 7 months jail for the murder of Scott Johnson. 34 years after the American mathematician's death, Scott White pleaded guilty to his murder. Mr Scott was punched near a high coastal cliff, which resulted in Mr Scott falling off the edge of the cliff. The New South Wales Education Minister wants teachers to cancel tomorrow's strike, promising that next month's budget will address public sector wages. But New South Wales Teachers Federation President Angelo Gavrielatos says the strike will go ahead as teachers seek pay rises of 5 to 7.5%. Families and friends across borders reunited in New Zealand on Monday when fully vaccinated travellers from more than 50 countries could enter without needing to quarantine. New Zealand reopened to Australian visitors last month, and now tourists can fly from visa waiver countries, including much of Europe, the USA, UK, Japan, Canada, Korea and Singapore. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says this step is a sign of the return to normality and it'll help with New Zealand's economic recovery.
Auckland Airport will now be open to 88% of pre-COVID markets. In addition, those holding existing visitor visas from any country in the world can also travel here.
In tennis, Alex de Minaur is advancing to the second round of the Madrid Open. The Australian number one defeated Pedro Martinez 7-6, 1-6, 6-3. It remains to be seen how the 23-year-old will perform after he lost his last 3 matches with Italy's Yannick Sinner, who will now face off against. And that's SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and Labor's Treasury spokesperson Jim Chalmers have appeared in a debate at the National Press Club in Canberra. Mr Frydenberg is defending his government's economic management, telling the Nine Network they are managing the economy in very difficult circumstances.
The COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine have both the main factors that are driving up higher inflation globally. And you heard yesterday from the Reserve Bank in their own words, the main drivers of higher inflation were global factors. So the Labor Party will seek to criticise us when interest rates go down, and they'll seek to criticise us when interest rates go up. But it's completely unreasonable to expect that emergency cash rates at just 10 basis points would stay there indefinitely.
But Labor's Treasury spokesperson Jim Chalmers has told the ABC the Prime Minister's credibility is in doubt.
Not just by the interest rate decision that was taken yesterday, but this full-blown cost of living crisis on his watch, which is all about falling real wages, prices which are absolutely skyrocketing out of control, and then you get the interest rate rise on top of that to add to the pain, and that's why consumer confidence this week has plummeted.
More than 200 public schools across New South Wales have been forced to close today as teachers strike for better pay and reduced workloads. Thousands of teachers have gathered outside the state's Parliament House seeking 2 hours of extra planning time and a pay rise between 5 and 7.5%. New South Wales Education Minister Sarah Mitchell told Nine Radio the disruption to students and parents caused by the strike is disappointing.
It's disappointing, there seems to be a determination. They are hell-bent on disruption and this industrial action. The strike is happening today. The walkouts are continuing when government MPs visit schools. The refusal to enact any new policies, which actually has students at the centre. They seem to be just hell-bent on this disruption for kids. It's incredibly frustrating, but we will continue to work in good faith. I want to get a fair and reasonable outcome here.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says recent evacuees from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol are safe. A United Nations brokered ceasefire has reportedly broken down, with the city's mayor saying over 200 civilians are still trapped inside the plant. Mr. Zelensky says Russian troops are not following agreements and are continuing with massive strikes on the complex.
Today, 156 people arrived in Zaporizhzhia, including women and children. They spent more than 2 months in shelters. Just imagine, for example, a child is 6 months old, 2 of which he spent underground hiding from bombs and shelling. Finally, these people are completely safe. They will get help.
At least 2 people are dead and dozens are missing, thought to be trapped under rubble following a building collapse in China. It's alleged a false safety report was issued for the 6-storey structure in Changsha province, resulting in the arrest of 11 people. A video posted by Chinese state media shows rescue efforts at the building, with some being taken away in stretchers. 9 people have so far been rescued. In sport, Novak Djokovic is through to the 3rd round of the Madrid Open. The world number 1 beat French tennis player Gaël Monfils with a 6-3, 6-2 win in the 2nd round. It means the Serbian tennis star will now face off against English player Andy Murray. And that's SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says he isn't telling anyone who to vote for. It follows suggestions Mr Turnbull was encouraging Australians to vote for independents over Liberal Party candidates. It comes a month after the former Liberal leader wouldn't confirm who he will vote for. Mr Turnbull says it's important to support democracy.
What we have to do is support democracy. I'm not telling anybody who to vote for, but I think it's very important that we have a democracy that is resilient. It's not so long ago there was a mob sent by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to undertake a coup, like a coup on the Capitol here in Washington. So you cannot take the endurance of our democratic institutions for granted.
Thousands of school students across New South Wales are missing a day of school to protest for action on climate change. Students are calling for the incoming federal government to commit to no new coal, oil or gas projects and to find a just transition for fossil and fuel workers and communities. The crowd started at midday at the Sydney Town Hall. School Strike for Climate student organiser Natasha Abawikarama says young people are angry over inaction on the climate crisis.
We know that fossil fuels are the direct cause of the climate crisis, yet the Morrison government, they give $20,000 a minute to the fossil fuel industry. But with doing that, they're throwing away our futures, and they know the consequences of this. And young people are just angry and disappointed. And we're here to say, we have an election coming up on May 21st, and we're here to tell them that our communities are ready for climate, and we're also here to plead with voters to vote for our futures.
The condition of a Queensland preschooler who was left for hours on a hot bus has improved, with her now stable and conscious. The 3-year-old was left in a critical condition after being apparently forgotten on a minibus outside her childcare centre for up to 6 hours as temperatures reached 28 degrees. But police say the girl is now sitting up and responsive as their investigations continue. World Health Organization officials say the true death toll of the COVID-19 pandemic is close to 15 million. That's more than 2 times the official death toll of 6 million. The figures include people killed directly by coronavirus and by the pandemic's impact on health systems. The WHO's Assistant Director General for Data, Analytics and Delivery for Impact, Samira Asma, says the numbers can sometimes be controversial.
Numbers are sometimes controversial. We have to recognize that the estimates are an approximation of a reality. As you also heard, that there is variability in data availability, and it has become very obvious during the entire course of the pandemic. There have been data that is missing or unknown. There has been delays in reporting, and basically all of us were caught unprepared.
In sport, Australian NBA star Ben Simmons is set to return to the Brooklyn Nets training camp following successful back surgery. Simmons had spent almost an entire year off court, citing mental health concerns. The Nets have since released a statement on Twitter saying he is expected to make a full recovery. And that's SBS News in Easy English.